While it may sound like a film starring Denzel Washington and Glenn Close, qualified immunity is one of the main reasons police can act like the law doesn't apply to them, because in a very real sense, it doesn't. Over the past 7 years, the number of people killed by American law enforcement has been depressingly consistent. There have been over 1,000 police killings each year, and around 10% of those killed were unarmed. Meanwhile, the number of police officers convicted of murder or manslaughter has yet to reach double digits in a single year. So while it may seem like the individual police who were involved in this year's slate of police killings are the only criminals, the truth is the whole system is guilty as hell. In our last episode, we looked at how the police are only the tip of a whole broken and unjust iceberg. Today, we're examining how violent police officers can call the court system for backup after they've killed or harmed someone. To understand how this works, I'm going to have to introduce you to one of the worst two-word combos in the English language. Yep, qualified immunity. Now, before we discuss that, there are 3 things we need to understand about how the police and the court system work together to cover up most police violence and wrongdoing. It's kind of like that police procedural that's employed more actors than every New York cafe combined, except a more accurate title would be Flaw and Disorder. First is the fact that, as we mentioned last episode, the Supreme Court upheld a police officer's right to use lethal force if they think a person might be a threat. This is one of the main reasons why, of the 6,800 civilians killed by police between 2013 and 2018, only 1.7% of those officers were charged with any crime. This is a very sturdy foundation that allows police to largely do what they want, including brutalize and murder, without ever going to trial. Next is the fact that our justice system functions so that prosecutors and police are typically on the same team. So when you consider how often police are needed as witnesses in a prosecutor's other trials, and how closely they work together in almost every other case, you might start to notice that maybe there's a conflict of interest. It's kind of like playing baseball against the Yankees, only the umpire is the team manager and the Yankees are legally allowed to murder you. Beyond that is the fact that in most of the country, the police are responsible for investigating the misconduct of their colleagues, aka their friends. For example, Derek Chauvin, the officer who killed George Floyd, had 17 complaints against him over the course of his 19-year career, and 16 of those complaints were closed without discipline. Now that we've got that covered, let's get into qualified immunity. Much like baby boomers or Star Wars, the power and scope of qualified immunity has only expanded since the 70s, and spoiler alert, it's definitely the dark side. Qualified immunity first emerged in 1967 during Pearson v. Ray. The Supreme Court's rationale was to protect law enforcement officials from lawsuits and financial liability in cases where they acted in supposed good faith, which seems shady, but okay. In 1982, qualified immunity was expanded to protect police and government officials from criminal and civil repercussions unless the conduct was clearly established as unconstitutional and unlawful. Getting worse. In 1986, it was reinforced to protect, and I quote, all but the plainly incompetent or those who knowingly violate the law. Ooh, that's bad. So today it effectively means officials can only be held liable if a federal court of appeals or the US Supreme Court has already found that an officer violated the Constitution by engaging in exactly the same conduct under exactly the same circumstances. In other words, in order for a police officer to be convicted, there has to already be a previous court decision that shows a different cop was convicted of doing the exact same thing. How exact? We're talking white people that can recite every lyric of Hamilton exact. In 2019, the Sixth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals decided that Tennessee cops who allowed their police dog to bite a surrendered suspect did not violate clearly established law, because even though there was case law making it illegal for police dogs to attack surrendered individuals, in the Tennessee case, the man was sitting on the ground with his hands raised instead of lying down like in the previous case. And if that sounds like our judicial system is splitting more hairs than a queen in a drag race sewing challenge, it's because it is. And in February, the Fifth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals held that a Texas prison guard was granted qualified immunity because he pepper sprayed an inmate in his locked cell for no reason, instead of hitting and tasing an inmate in his locked cell for no reason, which, is a huge difference. Qualified immunity has also been granted to officers who stole $225,000 from local businessmen, a cop who shot a 10-year-old while trying to shoot a non-threatening family dog, and police who destroyed an Idaho woman's home with grenades rather than searching it for a suspect who wasn't there. At this point, qualified immunity is so absurd, a police officer basically has to travel back in time, commit the awful act in the past, be arrested and convicted in the past, travel back to the future, and do the exact same thing again, which is like an even worse version of the movie Time Cop, and trust me, that movie was bad. This is why, even when police are investigated and charged, they rarely go to jail and are immune to civil suits. Instead, these charges are just a symbolic attempt to alleviate tensions with those calling for what feels like some semblance of accountability. Simply put, the courts won't end police violence because the courts themselves are part of the same unjust criminal legal system. Remember the cycle I talked about last episode? Yeah, this is why police violence is such a complex issue. But I'm not saying all of this to be depressing, nor do I think the desire to see dangerous, violent cops go to jail is wrong. And I gotta be honest, there is a very large part of me that wants to see those officers locked away. But there can be no justice for the murdered when the police are still creating more names. The justice we really want is for this to never happen to anyone again. As a society, we're kind of addicted to justice as punishment. But defaulting to imprisonment should not be the only definition. I mean, how is it that we have 6 Law & Order spinoffs but only 1 solution for achieving justice? Seriously, 6. But thanks to decades of work from activists, we're starting to see the fruit of a growing cultural movement, where people are refusing the 100+ years of subpar reforms that don't work and have been recycled and repackaged time and again. Instead, many activists are opting for a transformative shift away from police, jails, and prisons. In the case of Breonna Taylor, a medical worker who was killed by police during a no-knock raid of her home in the middle of the night, activists have put forth multiple ways to fight police violence that don't rely on the prison industrial complex. These ways include immediately firing the officers and making sure they cannot be hired at other police departments, supporting Breonna's partner, Kenneth Walker, who is fighting for immunity after using his firearm during the police invasion of their home, supporting the Louisville Community Bail Funds as they bail out those arrested for protesting Taylor's murder, and working to defund the entire Louisville Metro Police Department. And already Louisville has banned no-knock warrants in the city, fired one of the officers involved, and the charges against Kenneth Walker were dismissed, which is progress. When it comes to community safety, there are new possibilities on the horizon, rooted in care, healing, and transformation, not vengeance, control, and violence. And these are ideas that we will explore in the coming weeks. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time right here on Decoded.